The ranch. At the end of the road, Samuel Crowley hadn't spoken to another human being in 3 years when 5 filthy children appeared at his gate like ghosts rising from the summer dust. The oldest girl stepped forward with hollow eyes and a voice like gravel, begging for water. He raised his shotgun. Then the smallest boy, no more than 4 years old, looked up at him and asked in a whisper that cut through every wall Samuel had built, "Are you going to shoot us like the last man did?" Samuel's finger froze on the trigger. In that moment, between the heat shimmer and the silence, he faced a choice that would resurrect the man he thought he'd buried forever. If you want to see where this story goes, whether Samuel pulls that trigger or opens that gate, stay with me until the very end. And when you do, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see just how far this tale of second chances travels across this country of ours. The Montana sun had no mercy in late July. It pressed down on the prairie like a hammer on an anvil, turning the air into something you had to chew before you could breathe it. The grass had gone from gold to bone white, and the horizon shimmered with heat that made the distant mountains look like they were melting into the sky. Samuel Crowley stood on his porch with a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, surveying a ranch that had once meant something. The fences needed mending. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. The vegetable garden his wife had tended was now just a patch of dried stalks and cracked earth. He was 52 years old and felt like he'd already lived twice that. 3 years ago, influenza had taken Margaret and their only daughter, Emma, within a week of each other. Since then, Samuel had done exactly what was necessary to survive and not one thing more. He drained the coffee, grimaced at the bitterness, and turned to go inside when he saw them. 5 shapes moving along the road, small and dark against the white glare. At first he thought it was a mirage. The heat played tricks out here, made you see things that weren't there. But these shapes didn't waver. They came on slowly, irregularly, like wounded animals following some instinct they couldn't name. Samuel set down his cup and picked up the shotgun he kept by the door. As they drew closer, he could make out details. Children. 5 of them. The oldest looked to be maybe 14 or 15, a girl with dark hair plastered to her skull with sweat and dirt. Behind her came a boy around 12, all elbows and scowl, carrying what looked like a flour sack over his shoulder. Then 2 more. A girl of perhaps 8, with a mass of tangled blonde curls, and a boy a year or 2 younger, reed-thin and stumbling. The smallest was barely more than a toddler, clutched in the arms of the oldest girl, his face buried against her neck. They stopped at his gate. The oldest girl set the smallest boy down, but kept her hand on his shoulder. She looked at Samuel with eyes that had seen too much, eyes that belonged in a face 20 years older. Her dress, if you could call it that, was little more than a rag held together with hope and dirt. The others were no better. Their feet were wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been something else. Their skin was burned dark by the sun, lips cracked and bleeding. "Water," the girl said. Her voice came out like sandpaper on wood. "Please, just water." Samuel's grip tightened on the shotgun. He'd turned away 3 families already this summer, folks driven west by drought and desperation. He had enough trouble keeping himself alive without taking on the problems of strangers. "Move along," he said. "Nothing for you here." The girl didn't move. "We've been walking 8 days. The last ranch—" Her voice broke. She swallowed hard, tried again. "The man there, he fired over our heads. Told us if we came back, he'd aim lower. My brothers and sisters haven't had clean water in 3 days. Not my problem." Samuel's voice came out harder than he intended, but that was good. Hard kept people away. Hard kept him safe. The oldest boy stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "We ain't begging for charity. We can work. All of us. We're strong." Samuel barked a laugh. "You're half dead, boy. All of you are. And I don't need help." "Everyone needs help," the 8-year-old girl said suddenly. Her voice was small but clear. "That's what Mama said before she—" She stopped, biting her lip. The smallest boy raised his head from the oldest girl's shoulder. His eyes were enormous in his gaunt face, blue as a summer sky. He looked at Samuel with something that might have been curiosity, or might have been the last flicker of hope before it guttered out entirely. "Are you going to shoot us like the last man did?" The words hit Samuel like a fist to the chest. He felt something crack inside him, some wall he'd built brick by careful brick. His finger loosened on the trigger. He saw Emma in that little boy's face, Emma at 4 years old, before the sickness, asking him why the sky was blue, why horses had 4 legs, why people had to die. Jesus Christ, he muttered, lowering the gun. All right, 5 minutes. Water from the pump. Then you move on. The oldest girl's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it looked like she might collapse. Thank you. Thank you. Samuel turned away, not wanting to see their gratitude. Gratitude was a debt, and he didn't want to owe anyone anything. He walked to the pump near the barn, worked the handle until water gushed out cold and clear from the well that had never run dry in all the years he'd lived here. The children came forward like wild animals approaching a trap, cautious, ready to bolt. The oldest girl knelt first, cupped her hands under the stream, and drank with desperate gulps that made her throat work visibly. When she'd had enough, she moved aside and the others came forward one by one. The oldest boy, the 8-year-old girl, the younger boy, finally the smallest, who had to be held up to reach the water. Samuel watched them from the porch. They drank like they'd never tasted water before, like it was wine or honey or something precious beyond measure. The younger boy stuck his whole head under the pump, let the water run over his hair and face, and came up gasping and grinning. It was the first smile Samuel had seen from any of them. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Samuel told himself he was just being practical. If they collapsed on his land, that would be his problem too. Better to let them drink their fill and move on under their own power. When they finally stopped, the oldest girl stood and turned to face him. Thank you, she said again. We'll go now. But she didn't move. None of them did. They just stood there, dripping and swaying slightly, and Samuel realized with a sick feeling that they had nowhere to go. This was the last ranch on this road. Beyond it was just open country, miles of nothing until you hit the mountains or the next valley over. These children weren't going to make it another day in this heat. What are your names? The question came out before he could stop it. The oldest girl blinked, surprised. I'm Clara Reed. This is my brother Lucas. She indicated the scowling boy. That's Rosie and that's Benjamin. The little one is David. Our mother, she died 2 weeks ago, fever. We had no other family, so we... She trailed off, looking down at her feet. So you started walking? Yes, sir. Samuel rubbed his face, feeling the rasp of 3 days' stubble. This was a mistake. This was exactly the kind of mistake he'd sworn he'd never make again. Getting involved, caring, it only led to pain. But Emma's voice whispered in his memory, Papa, why don't we help them? She'd said that about a family of strangers once, travelers passing through. And he'd said yes because Emma had asked, and he'd have done anything for Emma. When did you last eat? Clara's chin came up slightly. We're not asking for food. I'm asking when you last ate. 2 days ago. A woman in town gave us half a loaf of bread and some hard cheese. We made it last as long as we could. Samuel cursed under his breath. He looked at the sky, at the sun that still had hours to go before it set. He looked at the 5 children standing in his yard, at the littlest one swaying on his feet, at the way Clara was trying so hard to stand straight when she was clearly about to fall over. Come inside, he said. I'll fix you something to eat, then you go. Clara's eyes widened. We can't pay you. Did I ask for payment? Come on before I change my mind. The children followed him into the house, moving slowly, warily. The interior was dim and cool after the brutal sun outside. Samuel hadn't really looked at the place in a long time, had stopped seeing it as anything other than walls and roof. But seeing it through strangers' eyes, he noticed the layer of dust on everything, the dishes piled in the basin, the general air of neglect. Sit, he said, pointing to the long table that had once hosted Sunday dinners and holiday feasts. The children sat, Clara lifting David onto her lap. They sat with their hands folded, back straight, like they were in church. Samuel opened the larder. He had beans, salt pork, potatoes, flour, coffee, the staples of a man living alone. He put a pot on the stove, got the fire going, started slicing potatoes and onions. His hands remembered the motions even if his heart had forgotten the reason for them. As he cooked, he was acutely aware of the silence behind him. No whispers, no fidgeting. These children knew how to be quiet. how to make themselves small. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. How old are you, Clara? 14, sir. 15 come September. And you, boy? He directed this at Lucas. 12. The answer was clipped, hostile. Rosie's 8, Clara offered when Rosie didn't speak. Benjamin just turned 6, David's 4. Samuel stirred the pot, adding salt pork, letting the smell fill the kitchen. He heard a small sound behind him and turned to see David's nose twitching, his eyes fixed on the stove with an intensity that was painful to witness. It'll be ready soon, Samuel said gruffly. He sliced bread, rough brown bread he'd baked 3 days ago, and set it on the table with butter and a jar of preserves. The children stared at it like it was a feast. Clara looked at him, a question in her eyes. Go ahead. They ate slowly at first, trying to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out. Within minutes, they were tearing into the bread, spreading butter and jam with trembling hands, chewing and swallowing and reaching for more. Samuel ladled stew into bowls and set them down. The children attacked it with spoons, burning their mouths in their eagerness, not caring. Samuel poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching. Lucas ate with one arm curved around his bowl, protecting it. Benjamin ate so fast he hiccuped. Rosie's eyes filled with tears as she chewed, like the simple act of eating something warm was more than she could bear. Clara tried to eat slowly, to set an example, but her body betrayed her. She was as desperate as the rest. Only David ate with any kind of calm. He sat in Clara's lap, taking small bites, chewing carefully, his eyes moving from face to face around the table like he was memorizing this moment. When the pot was empty and the bread was gone, the children sat back. Color had returned to their faces. Their eyes were brighter. They looked less like ghosts and more like actual children. Thank you, Clara said for the third time. We should go now. You've been more than kind. She started to stand, lifting David, but the little boy wrapped his arms around her neck and said, I'm sleepy, Clara. I know, baby, but we have to. Where exactly are you planning to go? Samuel asked. Clara froze. There's another town, we thought, maybe 20 miles west. 30, Samuel corrected. And there's nothing there but a general store and a saloon. No orphanage, no charity house, nothing. Just folks getting by, same as everywhere else. Clara's face went pale. We'll find something. We always do. You mean you'll walk 30 miles in this heat with no water and no food and hope someone takes pity on you before you all die of exposure? Samuel's voice came out harsher than he intended. That's not a plan. That's suicide. Lucas pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loud against the floor. We ain't your problem, old man. You gave us water and food like you said. We'll manage. Lucas, Clara started. No! Lucas's face was flushed with anger and something else, shame, maybe, or fear dressed up as fury. I'm sick of begging. I'm sick of people looking at us like we're trash. We'll find our own way. Sit down, boy, Samuel said quietly. You can't tell me what to do. You ain't my father. No, I'm not. But I'm the only thing standing between you and a hard death in the heat. So sit down and shut your mouth for 5 minutes while I think. Lucas glared at him, jaw clenched, hands balled into fists. For a moment, Samuel thought the boy might actually take a swing at him. But Clara touched Lucas's arm, a gentle pressure, and something in him deflated. He sat down hard, staring at the table. Samuel poured himself more coffee, buying time. This was insane. This was exactly what he'd sworn he wouldn't do. But the memory of Emma wouldn't leave him alone, and Margaret's voice joined it. We have more than we need, Samuel. We always have. Here's what's going to happen, he said finally. It's too hot to travel now. You'll stay here tonight, sleep in the barn. It's clean enough and cooler than outside. Tomorrow morning, if you still want to leave, I'll give you supplies and point you toward the nearest town that might actually help you. If you want to stay longer, he paused, not quite believing what he was about to say. You can work. I need help with the ranch. Fences need mending, garden needs tending, barn needs cleaning. You work, you eat. Fair trade. No charity. Clara stared at him. You mean it? I don't say things I don't mean. How long can we stay? Samuel shrugged. Long as the work needs doing, I suppose. Lucas was shaking his head. There's a catch. There's always a catch. The catch, Samuel said, meeting the boy's hostile gaze, is that you work hard. You do what I tell you, and you don't steal from me or cause trouble. Those are the rules. Break them, and you're gone. That's simple enough for you?" Lucas didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. Clara looked at her siblings, reading something in their faces that Samuel couldn't see. Then she turned back to him. "We'll stay, and we'll work. You won't regret this, Mr. I'm sorry, I don't know your name." "Crowley. Samuel Crowley." "Mr. Crowley." Clara stood, shifting David to her hip. "We'll earn our keep, I promise." Samuel waved a hand dismissively. "We'll see. For now, let me show you the barn." He led them outside and across the yard to the barn. It was larger than most, built to house horses and cattle and hay for the winter. But Samuel had sold off most of his stock over the past 3 years. Now there were just 2 horses in the stalls and a lot of empty space. "There's hay in the loft," he said, pointing. "It's clean and dry. You can make beds up there. There's blankets in the chest by the door. They're old, but they're whole. Outhouse is behind the barn. Pump's where you found it. I wake at dawn. If you're staying, I expect you up and ready to work by the time the sun clears the horizon." "Yes, sir," Clara said. Samuel nodded and turned to leave. But David's voice stopped him. "Mr. Crowley?" Samuel looked back. The little boy was watching him with those enormous blue eyes. "Are you going to make us leave tomorrow?" The question was so direct, so fearless despite everything, that Samuel felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. "I don't know, son. We'll see how it goes." David considered this, then nodded like it was a reasonable answer. "Okay." Samuel walked back to the house, feeling the weight of 5 pairs of eyes on his back. Inside, he poured himself whiskey instead of coffee and sat at the table, staring at the empty bowls and the crumbs of bread. The house felt different now, disturbed, like water after a stone's been thrown into it. He thought about Margaret, about what she would say if she could see him now. She'd probably laugh and call him a softy, then start planning how to make room for 5 children in their lives. Emma would be delighted. She'd always wanted siblings. But Margaret and Emma were gone, and Samuel was alone, and he had no business taking on 5 orphans when he could barely take care of himself. Except they weren't just orphans. They were Clara, who held her family together with sheer will. Lucas, angry and scared and trying so hard to be strong. Rosie with her tangled curls and quiet tears. Benjamin with his quick smile. And David, who asked the questions no one else dared to ask. Samuel drained his whiskey and went to bed, knowing he wouldn't sleep. In the barn, Clara spread blankets over hay and arranged her siblings like she'd done every night since their mother died. Rosie and Benjamin together, because Rosie had nightmares and Benjamin could always calm her down. David next to Clara, because he was still so small. Lucas on the other side, positioned between his family and the door, the protector even in sleep. "Is he really going to let us stay?" Rosie whispered. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "Maybe, if we work hard enough." "I don't trust him," Lucas muttered. "Men like that, they always want something." "He fed us," Benjamin pointed out. "That stew was the best thing I ever tasted." "That's 'cause you ain't eaten anything but scraps for 2 weeks, Lucas shot back. But his voice was softer than usual. Clara lay down and pulled David close. The little boy was already asleep, his breathing deep and even. For the first time in weeks, they were out of the sun, out of the wind, with full bellies and a roof over their heads. It wasn't much. It might not last. But for tonight, it was enough. "We'll be good," Rosie said drowsily. "We'll work real hard. Maybe he'll let us stay forever." "Forever's a long time," Lucas said. "I know." Rosie yawned. "But maybe." Clara stared up at the barn rafters, watching shadows move across the wood. She thought about the way Mr. Crowley had looked at them. Not with pity, exactly, but with something else. Recognition, maybe. Like he saw something in them that reminded him of something he'd lost. She thought about his house, the dust and neglect, the feeling of emptiness that hung over everything. A man living alone in a house meant for a family. There was a story there, she was certain. A sad one. But sad stories could have new chapters. Couldn't they? Clara closed her eyes and let herself hope, just a little, just for tonight. Tomorrow would bring work and worry and the constant fear that this fragile peace would shatter. But tonight, they were safe. In the house, Samuel lay awake and listened to the silence. Except it wasn't silent, not really. He could hear the wind in the cottonwoods, the creek running over stones, the horses shifting in their stalls. And under it all, if he listened carefully, he could almost hear the sound of children breathing in his barn, 5 heartbeats that had somehow become his responsibility. He didn't know if he was doing the right thing. He didn't know if he had the strength to care about anyone again. But the question David had asked, "Are you going to shoot us like the last man did?" That question had broken something open inside him, something he'd thought was dead and buried. Maybe it was. Maybe he was just going through the motions, and tomorrow he'd come to his senses and send them away with a sack of supplies and directions to the nearest town. Or maybe, just maybe, he'd wake up and find a reason to keep going that didn't involve simply waiting to die. Samuel closed his eyes and tried not to think about Emma, about Margaret, about all the ways love could destroy you when it was taken away. But they were there anyway, ghosts in the darkness, whispering that some things were worth the risk. Outside, the Montana night settled over the ranch like a blanket, and 5 children slept without fear for the first time in weeks, and a man who thought he'd lost everything lay awake and wondered if he'd just found something he didn't know he'd been looking for. The work would start tomorrow. The real test would come soon enough. But tonight, in the space between one breath and the next, 6 lives had shifted on their axis, pulled by gravity into an orbit none of them had planned. The ranch at the end of the road had been a place where things went to die. But as the stars wheeled overhead and the first hint of false dawn touched the eastern sky, it became something else entirely. It became a place where something might grow. Samuel woke before dawn out of habit, the sky still dark except for a thin line of gray on the eastern horizon. He dressed in the same clothes he'd worn yesterday, splashed water on his face from the basin, and stood at his window looking out at the barn. No movement yet. The children were probably still sleeping, exhausted from their ordeal. He should let them sleep. They'd need their strength for the work ahead. Except he wasn't sure there was work ahead. In the clear light of morning, or what passed for morning in the pre-dawn darkness, the whole thing seemed like madness. 5 children. 5 mouths to feed, 5 bodies to shelter, 5 souls he had no business being responsible for. He should wake them now, give them supplies, and send them on their way before this got any more complicated. Samuel pulled on his boots and went outside. The air was cool, almost cold, the last gift of night before the sun turned everything to fire again. He walked to the barn, his footsteps loud in the stillness. Inside, he found them already awake. Claire was braiding Rosie's hair with quick, efficient movements. Benjamin and David sat quietly on a hay bale, the older boy's arm around the younger. Lucas stood by the barn door, arms crossed, watching Samuel approach with wary eyes. "Didn't mean to wake you," Samuel said. "We were already up," Claire replied. "We're used to early mornings." Samuel nodded. "There's a pump outside. Get yourselves washed up. Then come to the house. I'll have breakfast ready." He turned to leave, but Clara's voice stopped him. "Mr. Crowley, what do you want us to do today?" Samuel looked at her, this 14-year-old girl who'd walked 8 days through hell to keep her siblings alive, who asked about work before she asked about anything else. "We'll figure it out after we eat." In the kitchen, he made coffee and started on breakfast. Eggs from his chickens, bacon from the smokehouse, more bread toasted over the stove. He heard the pump working outside, heard children's voices, quiet and careful. When they came in, their faces were scrubbed pink, their hair wet and slicked back. They looked less like wild things and more like actual children. They sat at the table without being told, hands folded, waiting. Samuel set plates down in front of them, and they ate with better manners than they'd shown last night, but no less hunger. He poured milk for the younger ones, coffee for Clara and Lucas. "You drink coffee?" he asked Lucas. "Started when I was 10, the boy said defensively. "Ma needed help staying awake during harvest." Samuel just nodded and filled the cup. When breakfast was done, Clara started gathering plates. "I'll wash these." "Leave them," Samuel said. "We've got other work to do." He led them outside into the growing light. The sun was just clearing the horizon, painting everything gold and pink. Samuel pointed to the east fence line. "That fence has been falling apart for 2 years. Needs posts replaced, wire restrung. It's hard work." "We can do it," Lucas said immediately. Claire and I will handle the fence, Samuel continued. Lucas, you'll muck out the stalls and feed the horses. Benjamin, there's a chicken coop that needs cleaning. Rosie, you'll help him. David, he paused, looking at the little boy. You can gather eggs. Think you can do that without breaking them? David nodded solemnly. I'll be real careful. All right then, let's get to it. They scattered to their tasks. Samuel collected tools, post hole diggers, wire cutters, hammer, staples, and loaded them into a wheelbarrow. Clara walked beside him toward the fence line, quiet and attentive. You ever mend a fence before? He asked. No, sir, but I can learn. The fence was worse than Samuel remembered. Posts had rotted at the base and tipped over, taking the wire with them. In some places, the wire had snapped entirely, leaving gaps big enough for cattle to wander through, if he'd had any cattle. The whole thing was a testament to how little he'd cared about maintaining this place. Samuel showed Clara how to dig out the old posts, how to set new ones, how to tamp the earth tight around them. She watched carefully, asked questions, then picked up the other post hole digger and started working. Her first few attempts were clumsy, but she learned fast. Within an hour, she'd found a rhythm. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the thunk of metal hitting earth and the rasp of their breathing. The sun climbed higher, the heat building. Samuel's shirt stuck to his back with sweat. Claire's face was flushed, her hands blistering, but she didn't complain. Why'd you let us stay? She asked suddenly. Samuel drove the digger into the ground, lifted out a scoop of dirt. Seemed like the thing to do. Most people would have turned us away. Most people did turn you away. Clara was quiet for a moment. The man who shot at us, Lucas tried to take an apple from his tree. We were so hungry. The man came out screaming, fired his rifle right over Lucas's head. Said if he caught us on his property again, he'd kill us and bury us where no one would find us. Samuel felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp. Some folks forget what it's like to be desperate. Were you ever desperate? The question caught him off guard. He looked at Clara, at this girl who asked direct questions like her little brother, who didn't waste words on pleasantries. Yeah, he said. I was. What happened? Samuel set down the digger, pulled off his hat, wiped sweat from his forehead. He didn't talk about Margaret and Emma. He'd spent 3 years not talking about them, building walls of silence around their memory. But something about Clara's steady gaze, her quiet strength, made the walls feel less necessary. I had a wife, he said. Margaret, and a daughter, Emma. She was about David's age when he stopped, swallowed. Influenza came through 3 years ago. Took them both in a week. I buried them on the hill behind the house. Clara's expression softened. I'm sorry. After that, I didn't see much point in keeping things up. The ranch, the house, myself, figured I'd just wait out my time and join them when it came. Is that why everything's so... Clara trailed off, looking embarrassed. Falling apart, Samuel finished. Yeah, that's why. They went back to work, digging and setting posts. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. Samuel had forgotten what it was like to work towards something instead of just going through the motions. Our ma died of fever too, Clara said after a while. It started in her chest, moved to her lungs. She fought for 3 days, but in the end, she shook her head. Before she died, she made me promise to keep us together. Said that was the most important thing, that we stay together no matter what. That's why you've been walking. Yes, sir. They wanted to split us up in town, send us to different families. I couldn't let that happen, so we left in the middle of the night and started walking. Figured we'd find somewhere, someone who'd take all of us. Samuel looked at this girl, barely more than a child herself, who'd taken on the weight of 4 other lives because of a promise to a dying mother. That took courage. Clara shrugged. Didn't feel like courage. Felt like the only choice. By midday, they'd replaced 6 posts and restrung 100 feet of wire. Samuel's back ached and his hands were sore, but the fence stood straight and true. He looked at it with something that might have been pride. They walked back to the barn to check on the others. Lucas had mucked out both stalls and was forking fresh hay into them. His movements sharp and angry, like he was fighting an invisible enemy. The horses watched him with calm eyes, unbothered by his hostility. You know anything about horses? Samuel asked. Lucas paused, leaning on the pitchfork. Some. Ma had a plow horse. I took care of him. What happened to him? Had to sell him after Ma died. Needed money for supplies. Lucas's jaw was tight. Man paid half what he was worth. Samuel walked to the nearest stall where his mare, Molly, stood watching him. She was getting old, like him, but still had good years left. This is Molly. Other one's Jack. They need grooming every few days, hooves picked out, regular exercise. You think you can handle that? Lucas met his eyes, suspicious. You're giving me a job? I'm asking if you can do a job. There's a difference. For a moment, Lucas's expression wavered between anger and something else, maybe hope, or the fear of hope. Then his face hardened again. I can do it. Good. Start tomorrow. Today you've done enough. In the chicken coop, Benjamin and Rosie were working together, Benjamin shoveling out old straw while Rosie swept. They'd made good progress, and the smell was already less offensive. David sat on an overturned bucket nearby, a basket of eggs at his feet. He'd only broken one, which Samuel could see from the yolk stain on his shirt. How many eggs? Samuel asked. David counted carefully, his lips moving. 14. That's good. That's real good. Samuel picked up the basket. You kids hungry? Yes, sir, they chorused. Lunch was bread and cheese and cold chicken left over from 2 days ago. Samuel had baked that chicken thinking it would last him a week. Now it was gone in one meal. He'd have to slaughter another hen soon, and another after that. He'd have to think about quantities differently, about cooking for 6 instead of 1. The children ate at the table while Samuel leaned against the counter, drinking coffee and watching them. They were more relaxed now, talking quietly among themselves. Rosie told Benjamin about a robin's nest she'd seen in the barn rafters. Benjamin showed David how to make a whistle from a blade of grass. Even Lucas seemed less hostile, though he still watched Samuel with guarded eyes. This afternoon, Samuel said when they'd finished eating, Claire and I will keep working on the fence. Lucas, you're done for the day. Rest or explore the property. I don't care which. Benjamin, Rosie, same for you. David, you stay close to the house. I don't want you wandering off. What about the garden? Clara asked, looking out the window at the dried stalks and cracked earth. Could we fix it? Samuel followed her gaze. Margaret's garden. Emma had helped plant it the last spring they were alive, tomatoes and beans and squash and herbs. After they died, Samuel had let it go to ruin. Garden's dead, he said. Nothing to fix. We could clear it out, Clara pressed. Replant for fall crops. My ma always said you could get good turnips and carrots in September if you planted in July. Samuel wanted to say no. The garden was Margaret's, and touching it felt like erasing her. But Margaret would have hated seeing it like this, would have been horrified at the waste. And Clara was right. There was still time to plant for fall. All right, he said. Tomorrow. Today we finish the fence. They worked until the sun started sinking toward the horizon, until the heat finally broke and the air turned soft and gold. Samuel's hands were raw and his shoulders screamed, but the fence was done. It wouldn't win any prizes for beauty, but it was solid and straight and would hold. Clara stood beside him, surveying their work. Her hands were bleeding, blisters torn open, but she hadn't said a word about the pain. You did good, Samuel said. Clara smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. So did you. That evening Samuel made stew again, a bigger pot this time. The children ate with good appetite, and afterward Clara insisted on washing the dishes while Rosie dried, and Benjamin put them away. They moved around the kitchen like they'd done it 1,000 times, a team that knew each other's rhythms. Lucas took David outside to watch the sunset. Through the window, Samuel saw them sitting on the porch steps, David tucked under Lucas's arm. The older boy was pointing at something in the sky, a hawk, maybe, or clouds shaped like animals. David's head followed the direction of Lucas's finger, his expression serious and intent. Samuel poured himself whiskey and sat at the table. Clara finished the dishes and hesitated, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure if she should. Spit it out, Samuel said. Can we really stay? The question came out in a rush. Not just tonight, but longer? We'll work hard, I promise. Harder than you've ever seen. We won't be trouble. Clara. Samuel held up a hand. Stop. She stopped, her face falling. You can stay, he said. Long as you need to, long as the work needs doing. You mean it? I don't say things I don't mean, he repeated what he'd told her yesterday. But there are rules. You work, you do what I tell you, you don't steal or cause trouble, and you keep up with whatever schooling you need. I won't have you growing up ignorant just because you're working a ranch. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. Thank you. You don't know what this means. I think I do. Samuel took a drink, felt the whiskey burn. But understand something. This doesn't make me your father. I'm not looking to replace what you lost. This is a business arrangement. You work, I provide food and shelter. That's all. Clara nodded, but something in her eyes said she didn't quite believe him. Yes, sir. That night, the children slept in the barn again, but Clara asked if they could bring their blankets closer to the house tomorrow. Maybe sleep on the porch, where it was cooler. Samuel said he'd think about it. He lay in bed listening to the sounds of the ranch, creek water, wind in the trees, horses shifting in their stalls, and underneath it all, the breathing of 5 children who'd become his responsibility, whether he wanted them or not. He thought about what he'd said to Clara. A business arrangement, that's all. But even as he said it, he'd known it was a lie. You didn't take in 5 orphans as a business arrangement. You did it because something in you broke when a 4-year-old boy asked if you were going to shoot him, because you saw your own daughter in a little girl's tangled curls, because silence and solitude had stopped being peace and started being a slow death. Samuel closed his eyes and tried not to think about the future, about all the ways this could go wrong. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally came, he dreamed of Margaret and Emma working in the garden, of children's laughter filling rooms that had been silent too long, of fence posts standing straight against the Montana sky. Morning came too soon. Samuel woke to the sound of voices outside, children's voices, excited and bright. He looked out the window and saw them already at the pump, washing up. Clara was braiding Rosie's hair again. Lucas was showing Benjamin how to splash water without getting his shirt too wet. David sat on the edge of the horse trough, kicking his feet, singing something tuneless and happy. Samuel dressed and went outside. You're up early. Wanted to get started, Clara said. You said we could work on the garden today. I said we'd see about the garden. Please, Rosie chimed in. We'll work real hard. Samuel looked at the garden plot, at the dead stalks and cracked earth, at Margaret's garden that hadn't grown anything in 3 years. Then he looked at these 5 children who'd walked 8 days through heat and rejection to find a place that might let them stay. All right, he said, let's see what we can do. They spent the morning clearing the garden. Samuel showed them how to pull up the old dead plants without damaging the soil too much, how to turn the earth with shovels and hoes, breaking up the hard-packed surface. Benjamin found worms and got excited, collecting them in a bucket. Rosie discovered a toad and named it Henry. Even David helped, carrying small handfuls of dead stalks to the burn pile. Lucas worked separately, grooming the horses like Samuel had asked. Through the barn door, Samuel could hear him talking to Molly in a low voice, telling her things he probably wouldn't say to another human being. The horse stood patiently, ears flicked back, listening. By afternoon, the garden was cleared, the earth turned, ready for planting. Samuel sent Benjamin to town with a list and enough money for seeds, turnips, carrots, lettuce, radishes, things that could still grow this late in the season. Take Jack, he told the boy. You know how to ride. Benjamin's eyes went wide. By myself? You're what, 6? That's old enough. Jack's gentle. He'll take care of you. Benjamin rode off sitting tall in the saddle, his face split with a grin. Samuel watched him go and felt something in his chest that might have been worry or might have been pride. He wasn't sure which, wasn't sure he wanted to know. While Benjamin was gone, Clara organized the others. Rosie fetched water in buckets. David collected stones from the creek to mark the garden border. Lucas finished with the horses and joined them, grudging but present. They worked together like a machine, each person doing their part without being told. Samuel watched from the porch, drinking coffee, and realized he was smiling. Actually smiling. When was the last time that had happened? Benjamin returned an hour later with seeds and news. Man at the store asked who I was, he reported. Said he hadn't seen me before. I told him I was staying at the Crowley Ranch. He looked real surprised. What did he say? Samuel asked. Asked if you were feeling all right, since you never come to town anymore. I said you seemed fine to me. Benjamin paused. Was that okay to say? That was fine, Samuel assured him. Did he give you any trouble? No, sir. Just seemed curious. Word would spread now. Within a week, the whole territory would know that Samuel Crowley had taken in 5 orphans. People would talk, speculate, maybe even come by to satisfy their curiosity. The thought made Samuel's jaw tighten. He'd kept to himself for 3 years, and he'd liked it that way. But looking at these children planting seeds in Margaret's garden, listening to their chatter and laughter, Samuel found he didn't care what people thought. Let them talk. Let them wonder. These kids needed a place to stay, and he had space and food and work that needed doing. It wasn't charity. It wasn't adoption. It was just life. Moving forward instead of standing still. They planted the seeds in careful rows, Clara reading the instructions from the packets, while Rosie and David made holes and Benjamin dropped seeds in. Lucas followed behind, covering the seeds with soil and patting it down. When they were done, they watered everything until the earth was dark and wet. Now what? Rosie asked. Now we wait, Samuel said. Seeds need time to grow. How long? Couple weeks before you see sprouts, couple months before we can harvest. Rosie's face fell. That's forever. That's farming, Samuel said. Everything worth having takes time. That night at dinner, chicken and dumplings that Clara helped him make, the children talked about the garden like it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened. They debated what would come up first, whether the carrots would be sweet, if the lettuce would be crispy. David fell asleep at the table, his head pillowed on his arms, and Clara carried him to the barn without waking him. Samuel sat alone in the quiet house and felt the walls pressing in less than they had before. The place still needed work, everything needed work, but it felt less like a tomb and more like a home that had been sleeping and was just starting to wake up. 3 days became a week. The fence stood straight. The garden showed the first green shoots. The barn was clean, the horses groomed and exercised, the chickens laying regular eggs. Lucas stopped looking at Samuel like he expected to be hit. Rosie laughed more. Benjamin asked endless questions about everything. David followed Samuel around like a small, quiet shadow. And Clara worked from sunup to sundown, never complaining, always watching, always making sure her siblings were safe and fed and happy. She was too young to carry that weight, Samuel thought, but she'd been carrying it so long she didn't know how to set it down. One evening, after the others had gone to the barn, Samuel found Clara sitting on the porch steps, staring at the sunset. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how different this is from what I thought would happen." She looked up at him. "I thought we'd keep walking until we collapsed, and someone would find us and split us up, and I'd break my promise to Ma. But instead we found you." Samuel sat down beside her. "Maybe you should have kept walking, might have found a real family, people who knew what they were doing." "You know what you're doing," Clara said quietly. "You're just pretending you don't." Samuel didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The creek sang its endless song. And on this ranch at the end of the road, 6 people who'd been alone were learning what it meant to not be alone anymore. The routine held for 2 more weeks, and Samuel started to believe that maybe this could work, that maybe these children could stay and the arrangement could continue without complications. He should have known better. The sheriff came on a Tuesday morning, riding up the long drive with dust trailing behind his horse like a banner. Samuel was in the barn checking on a loose board when he heard the hoofbeats. He stepped outside, squinting against the sun, and felt his stomach drop when he recognized Sheriff Tom Brennan. Tom was a decent man, fair and honest, but he was also the law, and the law had opinions about children without parents. Samuel had been expecting this visit ever since Benjamin had gone to town for seeds. He just hadn't expected it so soon. "Tom," Samuel said, walking out to meet him. "Samuel." Tom dismounted, tied his horse to the fence rail. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with a face weathered by 40 years of Montana sun. Been a while. 3 years, give or take. About that. Tom looked around the property, taking in the mended fence, the clean barn, the garden showing green shoots. His eyebrows rose slightly. Place looks different. I've had help. So I heard. Tom pulled off his hat, wiped sweat from his forehead. That's actually why I'm here. Got word you've taken in some children. 5 of them, if the talk is right. Samuel kept his expression neutral. They needed a place to stay. I needed help with the ranch. Seemed like a fair trade. These the Reed children? Family that lost their mother a few weeks back? That's right. Tom sighed, and Samuel could see the conversation heading exactly where he'd feared it would go. Samuel, you know I've got to ask. What's your arrangement with these kids? Are you planning to keep them? I'm giving them food and shelter in exchange for work. Nothing illegal about that. Nothing illegal, no, but there's proper ways to handle orphaned children, and this ain't it. Tom's voice was gentle but firm. They should be in the county orphanage or placed with families through the proper channels. You can't just take in 5 kids because you feel like it. The orphanage would split them up, Samuel said. Send them to different families, different towns. The oldest girl promised her dying mother she'd keep them together. I understand that, and it's real noble of the girl. But Samuel, you're a single man living alone. You got no experience with children. You haven't talked to another living soul in 3 years except when you absolutely had to. And now you've got 5 orphans living in your barn? Tom shook his head. People are asking questions. They're worried. Worried about what? The kids are fed, clothed, and working? They're better off here than they've been in months. Maybe so, but it ain't proper, and you know it. Tom put his hat back on. I'm going to need to see them, talk to them, make sure they're being treated right, and then I'm going to have to make a report to the county. They'll decide what happens next. Samuel's hands clenched into fists. These kids walked 8 days through hell to find someone who wouldn't turn them away. Every ranch, every town, every single person they asked for help either ignored them or ran them off. One man shot at them, Tom, over an apple. So forgive me if I'm not too concerned about what's proper. I'm not the enemy here, Tom said quietly. I'm just doing my job. Now where are they? Samuel wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Tom to get off his property and leave them alone. But Tom was right. He was just doing his job, and fighting him would only make things worse. They're working, Samuel said. Clara and Lucas are fixing the chicken coop. Benjamin and Rosie are weeding the garden. David's with them. Tom nodded. Let's go talk to them. They found the children exactly where Samuel said they'd be. Clara was on her knees replacing rotten boards in the coop wall while Lucas held them steady for her to nail. Benjamin and Rosie worked between the garden rows, pulling up weeds and tossing them into a bucket. David sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, playing with a collection of smooth stones he'd gathered from the creek. All of them froze when they saw the sheriff. Clara stood up slowly, putting herself between Tom and her siblings. Lucas dropped the board he was holding and moved to Clara's side. Benjamin grabbed Rosie's hand. David's face went pale. It's all right, Samuel said quickly. This is Sheriff Brennan. He just wants to talk to you. About what? Clara's voice was steady, but Samuel could see her hands trembling. Tom took off his hat again, held it in both hands like he was approaching something wild and skittish. I heard you folks have been staying here, and I wanted to check in, make sure everything's all right, that's all. Everything's fine, Clara said. Why don't you tell me your names? Tom said gently. I know you're Clara Reed, but what about the rest of you? Clara introduced her siblings one by one. Tom nodded at each of them, his expression kind but professional. How long you been here? 2 weeks and 4 days, Clara said. And how's Mr. Crowley been treating you? Good, real good. He feeds us 3 meals a day, gives us a place to sleep, teaches us how to work the ranch. Clara's words came faster now, desperate. We earn our keep. We're not charity cases. We work hard. I'm sure you do. Tom looked at each of the children in turn. Any of you have complaints? Anything you want to tell me? They shook their heads in unison. Rosie gripped Benjamin's hand tighter. David picked up a stone and held it like a talisman. Lucas, Tom said, addressing the boy directly. You're old enough to speak for yourself. How do you feel about this arrangement? Lucas's jaw tightened. For a moment, Samuel thought he might say something stupid, something angry that would give Tom an excuse to take them away. But then Lucas looked at Samuel, something complicated passing across his face, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled. "It's good here," he said. "Mr. Crowley's teaching me about horses. I'm learning a lot, and we get to stay together, which is what Ma wanted." Tom was quiet for a long moment, studying each face. Then he turned to Samuel. "Can I speak to you privately?" They walked back toward the house, out of earshot of the children. Samuel could feel 5 pairs of eyes burning into his back. "They seem healthy enough," Tom said, "and they're clearly not being mistreated. But Samuel, this isn't sustainable. You're not set up to be a guardian. You haven't gone through any legal process. And frankly, people are talking. A single man, 5 children, living in his barn. It doesn't look right." "I don't give a damn how it looks," Samuel said, his voice low and hard. "Those kids have been through hell. They need stability, and they need to stay together. I can provide that." "For how long? What happens when winter comes and they're still sleeping in a barn? What happens when they get sick or hurt or need schooling? You thought about any of that?" Samuel had thought about it. He'd thought about it every night for the past 2 weeks, lying awake and staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of children sleeping 50 yards away. He knew this couldn't last forever. He knew that at some point reality would come knocking, would demand answers he didn't have. But he'd also seen Clara's face when she realized they could stay. He'd seen Lucas gentling the horses with patient hands. He'd seen Rosie laugh and Benjamin learn, and David slowly start to trust that this place was safe. He'd felt something in himself wake up after 3 years of nothing but grief and silence. "I'll figure it out," Samuel said. Tom sighed. "I'm going to have to report this to the county. They'll send someone out to evaluate the situation, probably within the week. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you think about what you really want here. Because if you're serious about keeping these children, you're going to need to do it legal. That means filing for guardianship, going through the courts, proving you can provide for them proper." "I can provide for them." "In a barn, with no schooling, no legal standing, no plan for the future?" Tom shook his head. "The county won't see it that way. They'll see 5 orphans being housed by a recluse with no experience and no legal right to keep them. And they'll take those kids and split them up according to whatever families are willing to take them." Samuel felt cold despite the heat. "You're saying I have no choice." "I'm saying you have a choice. But it's going to be hard, and you're going to have to prove yourself. File for guardianship. Make this legal. Show the county you're serious and capable. Otherwise, those kids are going to be placed elsewhere, and there's nothing you or I can do to stop it." Tom put his hat back on and walked to his horse. He mounted up, looked down at Samuel with something like sympathy. "I'll give you until the end of the week before I file my report. That gives you time to talk to a lawyer, get your ducks in a row. But Samuel, if you're not serious about this, let me know now. Don't get those kids' hopes up just to have them crushed." "I'm serious," Samuel said. Tom nodded and rode away, leaving Samuel standing in his yard with the weight of 5 lives pressing down on his shoulders heavier than ever. The children came running the moment the sheriff was out of sight. Clara reached him first, her face pale. "He's going to take us away, isn't he?" "Not if I can help it," Samuel said. "But he said something, I could tell." "What did he say?" Samuel looked at their faces, scared, hopeful, trying so hard to be brave. He could lie, could tell them everything was fine, but they deserved the truth. "He said I need to file for legal guardianship. Go through the courts, make this official. Otherwise the county will place you with other families." "Separate families," Lucas said bitterly. That's what he meant. "Probably." "Can you do it?" Clara asked. "Can you get guardianship?" "I don't know. I've never done anything like this before, but I'm going to try." Rosie started crying, quiet tears running down her cheeks. Benjamin put his arm around her. David came and pressed himself against Samuel's leg, holding on tight. Samuel looked down at the little boy and felt something break open in his chest all over again. "Listen to me," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "I'm going to fight for you, all of you, but I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. The county is going to send people out here to judge whether I'm fit to be your guardian. They're going to ask questions, look at everything, and they might decide I'm not good enough. If that happens, don't," Clara said, her voice sharp. Don't say it. Don't tell us what happens if you fail, because you're not going to fail. You can't." The certainty in her voice, the absolute faith, scared Samuel more than anything else. "Clara, you saved us," she said. "When everyone else turned us away, you let us stay. You fed us and gave us work and treated us like we mattered. You think we're going to let some county official take that away without a fight?" "It's not up to you," Samuel said gently. You're children. You don't have a say in this." "Then we'll make them listen," Lucas said. His hands were clenched into fists. "We'll tell them we want to stay here, that we're happy here. They can't ignore that." Samuel wanted to tell them that yes, actually, the county could ignore that. The law didn't care much about what children wanted. It cared about what looked proper, what followed procedure, what checked all the right boxes. And a 52-year-old widower with no experience and 5 orphans living in his barn didn't check any boxes except the ones marked suspicious and irregular. But he didn't say that. Instead, he said, "We'll take it one step at a time. First thing is, I need to go to town tomorrow, talk to a lawyer, figure out what the process looks like." "Can I come with you?" Clara asked. "Best you stay here. Keep things running while I'm gone." "I want to help." "You are helping. You're keeping your siblings safe and the ranch working. That's what I need from you right now." That night, Samuel sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and a head full of doubts. He'd meant what he told Tom. He was serious about this, but serious and capable were two different things. What did he know about raising children? He'd had one daughter for 4 years, and he'd failed to protect her from influenza. What made him think he could handle 5 kids, 5 different personalities and needs and traumas? And even if he could handle it, even if he somehow convinced the county that he was fit to be their guardian, what then? He'd be responsible for them for the next decade at least, feeding them, clothing them, teaching them, keeping them safe. It was a commitment that would change everything about his life. Was he ready for that? 3 weeks ago, he'd been content to live alone and wait to die. Now he was contemplating becoming a father to 5 children who'd walked into his life out of sheer desperation. The door creaked open. Samuel looked up and saw David standing there in his nightshirt, bare feet on the wooden floor, eyes wide and solemn. "Can't sleep?" Samuel asked. David shook his head. He walked over to the table, climbed up into the chair next to Samuel, and sat there swinging his legs. "What's on your mind, son? Are they going to take us away?" Samuel poured himself another whiskey, took a long drink. "I'm going to try real hard to make sure that doesn't happen. But they might. Yeah, they might." David was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. Then he said, "The man who shot at us, he said we were trash, said nobody would ever want us because we were dirty and worthless." Rage flared hot in Samuel's chest. That man was wrong. Was he? David looked up, and his eyes were full of a hurt too deep for a 4-year-old to carry. "Everyone else seemed to think he was right. They all turned us away." "Not everyone." "You're different." David said it like it was a simple fact, like water was wet and the sky was blue. "You're not like the others." "What makes you say that?" "Because you're sad like us. You lost people too." "I can tell." Samuel felt like he'd been punched. This little boy saw straight through him, saw the grief Samuel thought he'd hidden behind walls of silence and whiskey. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I lost people too." "Do you miss them?" "Every day." "Does it get better?" Samuel looked at David, at this child who'd lost his mother and walked 8 days through hostile territory and still had the courage to ask the hard questions. "It gets different," he said. "The missing doesn't go away, but you learn to live with it. You find new reasons to keep going." "Like us?" Samuel hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the truth came out anyway. "Yeah, like you." David nodded like this made perfect sense. Then he slid off the chair, walked over to Samuel, and climbed into his lap. He settled there like he belonged, his head resting against Samuel's chest, and within minutes, he was asleep. Samuel sat there with this little boy in his arms, feeling the weight of him, the warmth, the trust. He thought about Emma, about holding her like this when she was small, about all the moments he'd taken for granted because he'd thought there would be endless more to come. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Morning came too early. Samuel left David sleeping in the big bed, he'd carried him there around midnight, and went to the barn to tell the others his plan. They were already awake, Clara braiding Rosie's hair, Lucas checking the horses, Benjamin feeding the chickens. "I'm going to town," he told them. "I'll be back by evening. Clara, you're in charge while I'm gone. Lucas, I need you to keep an eye on the younger ones. There's food in the larder. Help yourselves to whatever you need." "What if someone comes?" Clara asked. "What if the county sends someone while you're gone?" "Tell them I'll be back soon. Be polite, answer their questions, but don't let them take you anywhere. You understand?" Clara nodded, but her eyes were frightened. Samuel rode to town under a sky that promised rain later. The ride took 2 hours, and he spent every minute of it thinking about what he'd say, how he'd present his case, what arguments might convince a lawyer and a judge that he deserved to keep these children. The town was small, just one main street with a handful of businesses. Samuel tied his horse outside the lawyer's office and went inside. The lawyer's name was Edward Hayes, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers who looked surprised to see Samuel. "Mr. Crowley," he said, standing up from his desk, "I don't believe we've met. How can I help you?" Samuel told him everything, the children appearing at his gate, the arrangement they'd struck, Sheriff Brennan's visit, the threat of the county taking them away. Hayes listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a piece of paper. When Samuel finished, Hayes leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "This is an unusual situation." "I know that. The law regarding orphaned children is fairly clear. They're supposed to be placed with the county, which then finds suitable homes for them. What you've done, taking them in without legal authority, is technically not illegal, but it's highly irregular. Can I get legal authority? You can file for guardianship, yes. But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Crowley, it's not going to be easy. The court will look at several factors: your age, your financial stability, your living situation, your experience with children. The fact that you're a single man will count against you. So will the fact that you've been essentially isolated for 3 years. What if the children want to stay with me? That carries some weight, but not as much as you'd hope. The court's primary concern is what's best for the children, and they'll base that on objective criteria, not just the children's wishes. Samuel felt his frustration rising. So, what you're telling me is, I don't have a chance. I'm telling you it's going to be difficult, but not impossible. Hayes pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. If you're serious about this, here's what we need to do. First, we file a petition for guardianship. That starts the legal process. Second, we prepare for a hearing where you'll have to demonstrate that you can provide adequate care. That means showing financial stability, a suitable living environment, and a plan for their education and welfare. Third, we need character witnesses who can speak to your fitness as a guardian. I haven't talked to anyone in 3 years. Who's going to vouch for me? What about before? Were you part of the community before your family died? Samuel thought about Margaret dragging him to church socials, Emma's school teacher stopping by for tea, neighbors helping with harvest. Yeah, I was. Then we reach out to those people, remind them who you were, show them who you're becoming again. People in small towns have long memories, Mr. Crowley. They remember the good along with the bad. They spent the next hour going over details, filling out forms, discussing strategy. Hayes agreed to file the petition immediately and schedule a hearing as soon as possible. The faster they moved, the less time the county had to place the children elsewhere. One more thing, Hayes said as Samuel was leaving. The children are currently living in your barn, correct? That's right. That won't pass inspection. You need to move them into the house, give them proper beds and living space. The court will send someone to evaluate the home environment, and sleeping in a barn won't meet any reasonable standard of care. Samuel nodded. He'd known this was coming, had been avoiding it for reasons he didn't want to examine too closely. Moving the children into the house meant accepting that this was real, that they weren't just temporary help, but actual dependents. It meant opening up rooms that had been closed for 3 years, letting life back into spaces he'd kept as shrines to the dead. But if that's what it took, he'd do it. He rode back to the ranch under darkening skies. Rain started falling halfway home, cold and hard, turning the dust to mud. By the time he reached the property, he was soaked through and the world was gray with water. The children were waiting on the porch, huddled together under the overhang. They jumped up when they saw him, relief flooding their faces. "Did you do it?" Clara asked. "Did you file?" The lawyer's filing tomorrow, Samuel said, dismounting. There's going to be a hearing in a week or two. The county will send someone to inspect the property before then. What do we need to do? Samuel looked at the house, at the windows that had been dark for so long. We need to get you moved inside. Can't have you living in the barn when the inspector comes. The children looked at each other. Inside? Rosie said. You mean in the actual house? That's what I mean. Come on, let's get out of this rain. Inside, Samuel showed them the upstairs. There were 3 bedrooms besides his own. Margaret and Emma's room, the guest room, and a small room that had been used for storage. He'd have to clean them out, air them out, make them livable. Girls can take the big room, he said, pointing to Margaret and Emma's room. Boys can split the other 2. I'll get beds set up tonight. Clara walked into what had been Margaret's room, ran her hand over the dusty dresser, looked at the quilt still folded at the foot of the bed. This was your wife's room. It was. Are you sure? We don't want to... It's just a room, Samuel said, cutting her off, and it needs to be used. That's what Margaret would have wanted. But his voice cracked on his wife's name, and Clara heard it. She looked at him with those 2 old eyes and nodded. We'll take good care of it. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Samuel dragged furniture from the barn and storage, 2 more beds, a chest of drawers, a small desk. Clara washed linens while Rosie swept floors. Lucas and Benjamin moved their few possessions from the barn. David helped Samuel hang curtains that had been packed away, standing on a chair and holding the fabric while Samuel worked the rod into place. By evening, the rooms were ready. Not fancy, not perfect, but clean and functional. 3 bedrooms for 5 children who'd been sleeping on hay for weeks. At dinner, stew made from the last of the salt pork. The children were quiet, almost reverent. They kept glancing at the stairs that led up to their new rooms, like they couldn't quite believe this was real. I never had my own bed before, Rosie said quietly, always shared with Clara. You're still sharing a room with her, Samuel pointed out. Just different beds. I know, but still, my own bed. She said it like it was a miracle. After dinner, the children went upstairs. Samuel heard water running as they washed up, heard footsteps on the floorboards, heard quiet conversations through the walls. The house had been silent for so long that even these small sounds felt momentous. He stood in the hallway outside Margaret and Emma's room, the girls' room now, and listened to Clara reading to Rosie and David. Some story about a princess and a dragon. Rosie asked questions. David laughed at something. Clara's voice was patient and warm. Samuel closed his eyes and let himself remember Margaret reading to Emma the same way, in the same room, her voice creating worlds that existed only in the space between parent and child. The memory hurt, sharp and sweet at the same time, but it didn't destroy him the way it once would have. Maybe that's what healing was. Not forgetting, not moving on, but learning to hold the past and the present together without letting either one crush you. He went to his own room and lay in bed listening to his house come alive again with the sounds of children settling in for the night. Somewhere a floorboard creaked. Water ran in pipes, a door closed softly, and underneath it all, the sound of breathing, of heartbeats, of lives being lived in rooms that had held only ghosts. The county inspector would come. The hearing would happen. The judge would decide. But tonight, 5 children slept in real beds under a real roof, and a man who'd thought his life was over discovered he still had something worth fighting for. Outside, the rain fell steady and sure, washing the dust from the air and soaking into earth that was finally ready to grow something new. The county inspector arrived 5 days later, a thin woman named Mrs. Violet Hutchins, who stepped out of her carriage with a leather notebook and an expression that suggested she'd already made up her mind about what she'd find. Samuel watched her from the porch, Clara standing beside him with her hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. "Mr. Crowley," Mrs. Hutchins said, not offering her hand. "I'm here to conduct an evaluation of the living conditions for the Reed children." "I know why you're here," Samuel said. "Come on in." She walked through the house with slow, deliberate steps, examining everything. She ran her finger along the windowsill in the parlor and frowned at the dust. She opened cupboards in the kitchen and made notes about the contents. She climbed the stairs to the bedrooms and stood in the doorway of each one, studying the beds, the furniture, the small personal items the children had already accumulated. The children followed her like nervous shadows. Rosie had braided wildflowers into her hair that morning, trying to look presentable. Benjamin had scrubbed his face until it was pink. Lucas stood with his arms crossed, radiating hostility. David stayed close to Samuel, his small hand gripping Samuel's pant leg. "How long have the children been living in the house?" Mrs. Hutchins asked, writing something in her notebook. 4 days, Samuel said honestly. "And before that?" "They were in the barn." Her eyebrows rose. "The barn? For how long?" 2.5 weeks. Mrs. Hutchins made another note, her pen scratching loud in the quiet room. "And you saw nothing wrong with housing children in a barn? It was clean and dry. Better than sleeping outdoors, which is what they were doing before they got here." "That's not exactly a high standard, Mr. Crowley." Samuel felt his temper rising, but forced it down. Getting angry wouldn't help. "No, ma'am, it's not. But I'm doing my best to make things right." She walked to the window, looked out at the property. "I understand you've filed for guardianship of all 5 children." "That's correct." "May I ask why? You're a single man with no experience raising children, living on a remote ranch. There are families in town who would be happy to take 1 or 2 of them. Families with mothers and fathers, with other children, with experience." "Those families would split them up," Clara said, her voice sharp. "They'd send us to different houses, different towns. We'd never see each other again." Mrs. Hutchins turned to look at Clara. "And you think that would be worse than living here?" "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "I promised my mother I'd keep us together. Mr. Crowley is the only person who's willing to do that. Your mother's wishes, while understandable, aren't the primary concern here. The county's responsibility is to ensure each child is placed in the best possible environment for their individual development." "We're developing just fine," Lucas said, his voice hard. "Better than we were when we were starving on the road." Mrs. Hutchins made another note. "I'll need to speak with each of you privately. Mr. Crowley, if you could wait downstairs?" Samuel didn't like it, didn't like the idea of this woman interrogating the children without him there, but he had no choice. He went down to the kitchen and poured himself coffee, listening to the floorboards creak overhead as Mrs. Hutchins moved from room to room. She spent 20 minutes with each child. Samuel couldn't hear what was being said, but he could imagine the questions. "Are you happy here? Does Mr. Crowley treat you well? Do you feel safe? Do you want to stay?" When she finally came back downstairs, her expression was unreadable. "I'm going to need to speak with you privately as well, Mr. Crowley. Perhaps outside?" They walked out to the garden, where the first carrots were pushing through the soil and the lettuce had started to form small heads. Mrs. Hutchins looked at the neat rows, the careful weeding, the evidence of sustained effort. "The children worked on this?" she asked. "We all did. I showed them how, and they did the rest." "They speak highly of you," she said, and Samuel felt a small flutter of hope. "Every single one of them wants to stay here, even the oldest boy, who I suspect doesn't trust easily." "Lucas has his reasons not to trust." "I'm sure he does. But Mr. Crowley, the reality is that want and need are different things. These children want to stay together, and that's admirable. But they also need stability, education, proper socialization with other children their age. They need structure and routine and preparation for adult life. Can you provide all of that?" "I can try." "Trying isn't sufficient. The court needs guarantees, not good intentions." She closed her notebook, looked at him directly. "I'm going to be honest with you. My initial impression is that while you clearly care about these children and they clearly care about you, this situation is far from ideal. You're isolated out here, the children have no access to school, and you have no support system to help you manage 5 young people with complex needs." "I'll figure it out," Samuel said. "I'll hire a teacher to come out here, or I'll take them to town for school. I'll do whatever it takes." "What about when they're sick? What about discipline issues or emotional problems? Or the simple fact that raising 5 children is exhausting and you'll need help?" "Then I'll get help." "From whom? You haven't spoken to your neighbors in 3 years. You have no family in the area. You're asking the court to trust you with 5 lives when you've barely been able to manage your own." The words stung because they were true. Samuel had been barely managing, had been sleepwalking through his days waiting for them to end, but that had changed. The children had changed it. "You're right," he said. "I was barely managing. I lost my wife and daughter, and I gave up. But these kids, They didn't give up. They walked 8 days through heat and rejection and kept going because they had each other and a promise to keep. They saved me as much as I saved them. And maybe I'm not perfect, maybe I don't have all the answers, but I'm here and I'm willing and I won't split them up. Mrs. Hutchins studied him for a long moment. The hearing is scheduled for next week. I'll submit my report before then. I suggest you spend that time thinking very carefully about whether you're truly prepared for what guardianship entails. Because if the judge grants it and you fail these children, the consequences will be severe. She left without saying goodbye to the children. Samuel watched her carriage disappear down the long drive, dust settling in her wake like an omen. Clara came out to stand beside him. What did she say? She said we have a week to prove ourselves. How do we do that? Samuel looked at this girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who carried the weight of 4 other lives on her 14-year-old shoulders. We live, Clara. We keep doing what we've been doing. We work, we take care of each other, and we hope it's enough. That week was the longest of Samuel's life. Every morning he woke up wondering if this would be the day someone came to take the children away. Every evening he went to bed grateful for one more day they were still here. They fell into rhythms without discussing them. Clara making breakfast while Samuel fed the livestock, Lucas exercising the horses while Benjamin and Rosie tended the garden, David following Samuel everywhere asking questions about everything. Why do horses need shoes? David asked one morning while Samuel was showing Lucas how to check Molly's hooves. Because their feet are sensitive, Samuel explained. The shoes protect them from rocks and rough ground. Do they hurt when you put them on? Not if you do it right. The hoof is like a big fingernail. You're just hammering into the hard part. David considered this solemnly. Can I help next time? You can watch. Maybe when you're a bit bigger you can hold the tools. Lucas looked up from where he was cleaning mud from Molly's hoof. He's a good teacher, he said quietly. It was the first compliment Lucas had given Samuel, and it landed with unexpected weight. You're a good student, Samuel replied. Your ma taught you well. Something in Lucas's face shifted. She tried. It was hard after Pa died. She had to work all the time, take in washing and mending just to keep us fed. I should have helped more, should have found work, but nobody wanted to hire a kid. How old were you when your pa died? 9. David wasn't even born yet. Lucas went back to work on the hoof, his movements gentle despite the tension in his shoulders. Ma said Pa would be proud of how I looked after things, but I don't know. Feels like I failed her. Let her work herself to death while I... Stop, Samuel said. You were a child. You did what you could. Your ma knew that. Did she? Lucas's voice broke. Because when she was dying, she didn't ask me to keep everyone together. She asked Clara. Like she knew I wasn't strong enough. Samuel set down the hoof pick he was holding. She asked Clara because Clara's the oldest. But Lucas, you've been strong enough this whole time. You protected your siblings on the road. You've worked harder than any 12-year-old should have to. You're still working, still protecting. Your ma would be proud. I'm sure of it. Lucas didn't respond, but Samuel saw him wipe his eyes quickly before bending back to his work. In the house, Clara taught Rosie and Benjamin to read using an old primer Samuel found in the attic. It had been Emma's, the pages worn soft from small hands turning them over and over. Clara's voice drifted through the open window as she sounded out words, making Rosie repeat them until they stuck. C-A-T, cat. Good, Rosie. Now this one. D-O-G, dog. Perfect. Benjamin, your turn. Samuel listened and felt something in his chest that might have been peace. This was what the house was supposed to sound like. Not silence and grief, but life and learning and the messy, beautiful work of growing up. The garden was thriving now, the vegetables growing faster than Samuel had expected. Clara checked it every morning, measuring the carrots' progress with her fingers, testing the lettuce leaves for crispness. She'd taken ownership of it in a way that reminded Samuel of Margaret, that same fierce pride in making things grow. We'll be able to harvest soon, she told him one evening. Maybe another week or 2. You've done good work. We all have. She looked at him sideways. Do you think it'll matter? At the hearing? That we've kept the place running, learned new things? I hope so. But you don't know. No, I don't know. Clara was quiet for a moment, pulling weeds that had somehow appeared overnight. I've been thinking about what happens if the judge says no. If they take us away and split us up. Don't think about that. I have to. Because if it happens, I need to make sure everyone knows. Her voice caught. They need to know it's not their fault. That they didn't do anything wrong. That some things just happen no matter how hard you fight. Samuel knelt beside her in the dirt, ignoring the protest from his knees. Clara, look at me. She did, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. We're going to fight like hell, he said, and we might lose. But if we do, it won't be because we didn't try hard enough or because you weren't strong enough. It'll be because the system is broken and the law is stupid and the world isn't fair. You understand? I understand, but that doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. The night before the hearing, Samuel couldn't sleep. He got up around midnight and went downstairs to find Lucas sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Can't sleep either? Samuel asked. Lucas shook his head. Keep thinking about tomorrow, about what I'm supposed to say. Samuel poured 2 glasses of milk, set one in front of Lucas. Say the truth. That's all anyone can do. What if the truth isn't good enough? What if they look at us and see poor orphans who'd be better off with proper families who know what they're doing? Then they're blind, Samuel said. But Lucas, I need you to understand something. If the judge says no tomorrow, if they decide to place you all separately, that doesn't mean this was a mistake. These past few weeks, you've had a home. You've been safe and fed and together. Nobody can take that away from you. It happened. It was real. Lucas looked at him, and Samuel saw the scared little boy underneath all that anger and bravado. I don't want to lose another home. I don't think I can do it again. I know, but you're stronger than you think. You all are. They sat in silence, drinking milk, 2 people who'd lost everything learning how to hope again, despite knowing how badly it could hurt. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that promised heat later but started out almost pleasant. Samuel dressed in his only good suit, the one he'd worn to Margaret and Emma's funeral. It smelled like mothballs and felt too tight across the shoulders, but it would have to do. The children dressed in their best clothes too, which wasn't saying much. Clara wore a dress that was too short for her, let down as far as the hem would allow. Rosie's dress had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric. The boys wore shirts that were clean but threadbare, pants that showed their ankles. They loaded into the wagon, all 6 of them barely fitting, and made the long drive to town. Nobody spoke. The silence felt heavy, full of all the things they were afraid to say out loud. The courthouse was a square brick building in the center of town, imposing in its plainness. They walked up the steps together, Samuel in front, the children behind him in descending order like stairs. People stared. Samuel heard whispers, felt the weight of judgment from folks who'd known him before, and wondered what he was doing now. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Samuel expected, just a few rows of benches and a raised platform where the judge would sit. Edward Hayes was already there, organizing papers. He nodded to Samuel. Good morning, children. You'll sit in the front row. Mr. Crowley, you'll sit with me at the table. They took their places. Samuel looked back at the children, 5 faces trying so hard to be brave, and felt his heart clench. Whatever happened today would change all of their lives. He just hoped it would change them for the better. The judge entered, an older man with steel-gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen everything twice. Everyone stood. Be seated, Judge Martin said. We're here for the guardianship petition of Samuel Crowley regarding the minor children Clara, Lucas, Rosie, Benjamin, and David Reed. Mr. Hayes, you're representing Mr. Crowley? Yes, Your Honor. And the county? A man Samuel didn't recognize stood up. Thomas Wilkes for the county, Your Honor. Proceed. Hayes stood and began laying out the case. He talked about the children's circumstances, their need to stay together, Samuel's willingness and ability to care for them. He presented financial records showing Samuel had enough money to support 6 people. He called Samuel to the stand and asked him questions about his plans, his motivations, his understanding of what guardianship meant. Samuel answered as honestly as he could. Yes, he'd been isolated for 3 years. Yes, he had no experience with children beyond his own daughter. Yes, this was unconventional. But he also talked about the work they'd done together, the routine they'd established, the way the children had brought his ranch and his life back from the edge of collapse. Then Wilkes stood up for cross-examination, and Samuel knew this was where things would get difficult. Mr. Crowley, you stated that you've been isolated for 3 years. During that time, did you seek any help for your grief? No? Did you maintain relationships with friends, neighbors, community members? No? Did you attend church, participate in town functions, engage with society in any meaningful way? No. So for 3 years, you essentially withdrew from all human contact, and now you're asking this court to believe you're capable of raising 5 children who will need social interaction, community involvement, and connections beyond your isolated ranch? Samuel's jaw tightened. People change. Do they? Or do they just temporarily adjust when it suits them? Wilkes paced in front of the bench. Mr. Crowley, what happens when the novelty wears off? When the children are no longer a distraction from your grief, but an actual responsibility that constrains your life? What happens when you want to retreat back into isolation, but you can't because 5 young people depend on you? That won't happen. How can you be sure? Because I've already had that chance every single day for the past 3 weeks, and I haven't taken it. Samuel leaned forward. Yes, I withdrew after my family died. Yes, I gave up on everything that mattered. But these children walked into my life and reminded me that giving up is a choice, and it's a choice I don't want to make anymore. Wilkes wasn't satisfied. Mrs. Hutchins submitted a report stating that the children were initially housed in your barn. Can you explain that decision? They needed shelter immediately. The barn was clean and dry, but not appropriate for children. Better than the road. Again, that's not exactly a high standard. Wilkes turned to the judge. Your Honor, while Mr. Crowley's intentions may be good, his judgment is questionable. Housing children in a barn, having no plan for their education, isolating them on a remote ranch with no access to peers or community, these are not the actions of someone prepared for guardianship. Hayes stood up. Your Honor, Mr. Crowley has addressed all of these concerns. The children are now properly housed. He's committed to arranging education, either by bringing them to town or hiring a teacher, and the children themselves have thrived under his care. The children are present, correct? Judge Martin asked. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to hear from them, starting with the oldest, Clara Reed. Please approach. Clara stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked to the witness stand with her head high. She was sworn in and sat down, her hands folded in her lap. Miss Reed, Judge Martin said, his voice gentler than it had been. I understand you've been living with Mr. Crowley for about a month now. Can you tell me about that experience? It's been good, sir. Better than good. Mr. Crowley took us in when nobody else would. He's taught us how to work a ranch, how to be useful. He feeds us good food and gives us a safe place to sleep. He doesn't yell or hit or make us feel like we're burdens. Do you want to stay with him? Yes, sir. More than anything. Even if it means living on an isolated ranch instead of in town where you'd have access to school and friends your own age? Clara didn't hesitate. I'd rather be with my family on a ranch than separated in town. But surely you understand that your siblings might have better opportunities if they were placed with established families? Better opportunities to forget each other, to grow up as strangers? Clara's voice rose slightly. My mother's last words to me were, keep them together. That's what I promised her. That's what Mr. Crowley is helping me do. I don't see how opportunities matter if we're not together to share them. Judge Martin nodded slowly. Lucas Reed. Lucas approached the stand like he was walking to his own execution. He sat down stiffly, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. Lucas, you're 12 years old enough to understand what's being decided here. Tell me honestly, do you feel safe with Mr. Crowley? Lucas's jaw worked. Samuel could see him fighting some internal battle, some instinct to protect himself by saying nothing. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet but clear. I didn't trust him at first. Thought he was like all the others, looking for cheap labor or something worse. But he's not. He's teaching me about horses, about fixing things, about... Lucas paused. About being a man, I guess. Not by telling me, but by showing me. How to work hard without complaint. How to take care of things. How to keep going even when you want to quit. But do you feel safe? Yes, sir. For the first time since my father died, I feel safe. Benjamin and Rosie were called next. Benjamin talked about gathering eggs and learning to read. Rosie talked about the garden and having her own bed. They were nervous, and their answers were short, but their sincerity was unmistakable. Then David was called. The little boy walked to the stand with slow steps, and the bailiff had to get a stack of books for him to sit on so he could see over the edge. He looked so small up there, so vulnerable. "David," Judge Martin said, his voice very gentle now, "you're only 4 years old, so I'm just going to ask you one question. Are you happy living with Mr. Crowley?" David nodded. "Can you tell me why?" David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because he didn't shoot us." The courtroom went very still. Judge Martin leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "When we came to his gate, I asked if he was going to shoot us like the last man did. And he said no. And he didn't. And he gave us water and food and a place to sleep, and he's teaching me about eggs and horses," and David's voice wobbled. "And he's sad like us, but he's trying to be happy again, and I think we're helping him. And he's helping us, and I don't want to go away." Tears were running down David's face now. Clara started to stand, but the judge held up a hand. "It's all right, David. You can go sit down." David climbed down from the chair and ran to Clara, who gathered him into her arms. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of a 4-year-old boy crying. Judge Martin sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I'm going to take a short recess to review the evidence and testimony. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. Everyone stood as he left. Samuel felt like his heart was trying to beat its way out of his chest. Hayes put a hand on his shoulder. "That went as well as it could have," he said. "The children's testimony was powerful. Is it enough?" "I don't know. Judge Martin is fair, but he's also a stickler for procedure. This is an unusual case." The 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Samuel stood outside with the children, who were quiet and pale. Clara held David, who'd stopped crying but still clung to her. Lucas paced like a caged animal. Rosie and Benjamin held hands. When they were called back in, Samuel's legs felt unsteady. They took their seats, and Judge Martin entered. "I've considered all the evidence and testimony," he said. "This is not a straightforward case. On one hand, Mr. Crowley is a single man with limited experience and questionable judgment in some areas. On the other hand, the children are clearly thriving under his care and desperately want to stay together. The law is meant to serve the best interests of the children, but determining what those interests are is not always clear." He paused, and Samuel felt the world narrow to just this moment, this decision that would determine everything. "However," Judge Martin continued, "I believe that keeping these children together is paramount. They've lost their parents and their home. Separating them now would compound that trauma. Mr. Crowley, while unconventional, has demonstrated both willingness and capacity to care for them. Therefore, I'm granting temporary guardianship for a period of 6 months." Samuel's heart leaped, but the judge wasn't finished. "During that time, Mr. Crowley will be required to meet certain conditions. The children must attend school, either in town or through an approved tutor. The property will be inspected quarterly to ensure adequate living conditions. Mr. Crowley will meet monthly with a county representative to discuss the children's progress and any concerns. At the end of 6 months, we'll reconvene to determine if the arrangement should be made permanent. Do you understand these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor," Samuel said, his voice rough. "Then guardianship is granted. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell, and the room erupted. Clara burst into tears, laughing and crying at the same time. Lucas's whole body sagged with relief. Rosie and Benjamin hugged each other, jumping up and down. David looked confused until Clara told him they could stay, and then he smiled bigger than Samuel had ever seen. Samuel stood there trying to process what had just happened. 6 months. Not permanent, but not nothing either. 6 months to prove himself, to prove they could make this work. Hayes shook his hand. "Congratulations. Now the real work begins." "I know." Outside, people were staring again, but Samuel didn't care. The children surrounded him, talking all at once, their relief and joy spilling over. He herded them toward the wagon, and they piled in, still chattering. On the ride home, as the town disappeared behind them and the ranch appeared ahead, Clara said, 6 months, that's not very long. It's long enough, Samuel said. We'll make it work. How? Same way we've been doing it, one day at a time. Lucas spoke up from the back. What if we mess up? What if we do something wrong and the judge changes his mind? Then we'll deal with it. But we're not going to mess up. We're going to work harder than we've ever worked, and we're going to show them that this is exactly where we belong. The children fell quiet, absorbing this. Then David said, I like it here. I want to stay forever. So do I, son, Samuel said quietly. So do I. When they reached the ranch, the sun was starting to set, painting everything gold and orange. They climbed out of the wagon and stood looking at the house, the barn, the garden, the fence line stretching toward the horizon. This place that had been dying was alive again, full of noise and mess and possibility. Come on, Samuel said. Let's go home. And they did, all 6 of them walking together toward a future that was uncertain and fragile, but theirs to build, one day, one choice, one moment of faith at a time. That night they celebrated with a supper that felt like a feast, even though it was just fried chicken and mashed potatoes and green beans from a jar. Clara set the table with Margaret's good plates, the one Samuel hadn't touched in 3 years. Rosie picked wildflowers and put them in a chipped vase in the center. Benjamin and David helped Samuel carry food from the stove, concentrating so hard on not spilling that their tongues stuck out between their teeth. Lucas poured water into glasses without being asked, moving around the table with careful precision. They sat together, all 6 of them, and for the first time it didn't feel temporary. It felt like something that might actually last. Can we say grace? Rosie asked. Mama always made us say grace. Samuel hesitated. He hadn't prayed since Margaret and Emma died, hadn't seen the point in talking to a God who'd taken everything that mattered. But Rosie was looking at him with hopeful eyes, and he found himself nodding. Go ahead. Rosie folded her hands and bowed her head. The others did the same. Thank you for this food and for Mr. Crowley and for letting us stay together. Amen. Amen, the others echoed. They ate with good appetite, the tension of the hearing finally releasing. David fell asleep at the table again, his face nearly in his mashed potatoes, and Clara carried him upstairs. Samuel listened to her footsteps overhead, the creak of David's bed as she laid him down, the soft sound of her voice as she tucked him in. When she came back down, the other children had started clearing dishes. Clara moved to help, but Samuel stopped her. Sit. You've done enough today. So have you. Sit anyway. She sat, watching her siblings work together in the kitchen. Lucas washed, Benjamin dried. Rosie put things away. They developed their own system, their own rhythm. Samuel poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Clara. You drink coffee now? He asked. Started a few days ago. Figured if I'm going to be working like an adult, might as well drink like one too. Samuel smiled slightly. You're still 14, Clara. You're allowed to be a kid sometimes. When I'm keeping house or working the garden or making sure my brothers and sisters don't fall apart? She shook her head. I stopped being a kid when Ma died. Maybe. But you've got 6 months now where you don't have to carry everything alone. Let me help. Clara looked at him over her coffee cup, and something in her expression softened. You already are helping, more than you know. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt like the beginnings of something permanent. Samuel hired a tutor from town, a young woman named Miss Sarah Patterson, who'd just finished her own schooling and needed work. She came 3 days a week, teaching the children reading, writing, arithmetic, history. She was patient with David, who struggled with his letters, and challenged Clara, who devoured books like a starving person at a feast. On the days Miss Patterson didn't come, the children worked the ranch. The garden was producing now, carrots and turnips and lettuce that they ate fresh or preserved for winter. Lucas had taken over all the horse care, and under his attention both Molly and Jack looked better than they had in years, their coats glossy, their movements easier. Benjamin had developed an unexpected talent for carpentry, helping Samuel repair the barn door and build new shelves in the house. Rosie proved to have a way with the chickens, talking to them in a low voice that kept them calm and productive. And David shadowed Samuel everywhere, asking questions that ranged from profound to absurd. Why did the sun come up? Where did the creek water come from? Why did some eggs have 2 yolks? Why were horses bigger than chickens? Why did people die? That last question came one morning while they were feeding the horses. David asked it casually, like he was asking about the weather, but Samuel knew better than to dismiss it. People die because everything that lives eventually stops living, Samuel said. It's part of how the world works. But why? I don't know, son. Nobody really knows. David thought about this, patting Molly's nose with his small hand. When you die, will we have to leave? The question hit Samuel harder than he'd expected. I'm not planning on dying anytime soon. But you're old. Thanks for that, Samuel said dryly. But I've got years left in me yet. And even if something did happen to me, I'm making arrangements. You'd be taken care of. By who? By the law, by people who care. You wouldn't be alone. David didn't look convinced. I don't want you to die. Samuel knelt down, ignoring the protest from his knees, and looked David in the eye. I don't want to die either. I've got too much to do here. Got to make sure you kids grow up right. Got to see this ranch running proper again. Got to keep Clara from working herself to death, and Lucas from picking fights with the county inspector. He smiled. So I'm going to stick around as long as I can. Deal? David considered this seriously, then nodded. Deal. The first county inspection came at the end of the second month. A different woman this time, younger and less severe than Mrs. Hutchins. Her name was Miss Alice Warren, and she seemed genuinely pleased by what she found. The children were clean and well-fed, the house was in good repair, and Miss Patterson provided a glowing report about their educational progress. Clara is reading at a level far beyond her age, Miss Patterson told Miss Warren. Lucas has a gift for mathematics. Benjamin's penmanship is excellent. Rosie is excelling in history, and David, while young, is showing remarkable curiosity and retention. And their behavior? Miss Warren asked. Exemplary. They work hard, help each other, and show respect for Mr. Crowley and for me. I've taught children from what people would call proper families, who had half the manners these children display. Miss Warren made notes in her book, but unlike Mrs. Hutchins, her notes seemed positive. When she left, she shook Samuel's hand and said, Keep doing what you're doing, Mr. Crowley. The county will receive a favorable report. Clara, who'd been watching from the porch, let out a breath she'd been holding. 1 down, 2 to go. Don't count them down, Samuel said. Just live them. But it was hard not to count them down, not to feel the pressure of time passing. Every night Samuel lay awake thinking about the hearing that would come at the end of 6 months. Would they extend his guardianship? Would they make it permanent? Or would they decide that 6 months was enough to prove it wasn't working and split the children up after all? He couldn't think about that possibility without his chest tightening. These children had become his life in a way he hadn't anticipated. He woke up to Benjamin's cheerful chatter and went to bed to the sound of Rosie and Clara talking in their room. He taught Lucas how to saddle a horse properly and listened to David's endless questions and watched Clara slowly learn to relax, to laugh, to be 14 instead of 40. He wasn't their father. He'd been clear about that from the start, but he was something: guardian, teacher, protector. Maybe that was enough. The second inspection went as well as the first. The third was scheduled for late autumn, just weeks before the final hearing. By then the ranch had transformed completely. The fences were all mended, the barn was repaired, the house had been painted inside and out. The garden had been harvested, and they'd put up enough preserves to last the winter. Samuel had even started rebuilding his herd, buying 3 cows and a bull with money he'd been saving without purpose for 3 years. The children had transformed too. Clara had grown taller, had started to fill out with regular meals. Lucas's anger had softened into something quieter, more focused. He still didn't trust easily, but he didn't flinch at sudden movements anymore. Rosie laughed constantly, her giggles filling the house. Benjamin had lost the haunted look he'd worn when they first arrived. And David had grown from a solemn shadow into an actual little boy, full of energy and mischief and joy. Samuel stood on his porch one evening in early November, watching the sun set over the mountains, and realized he was happy. Actually happy. For the first time since Margaret and Emma died, he felt like his life had meaning beyond just marking time until it ended. Mr. Crowley? Clara's voice came from behind him. She'd taken to calling him by his last name still, never quite comfortable with anything more familiar. Can I ask you something? Always. She came to stand beside him, pulling her shawl tighter against the autumn chill. What happens if the judge says no at the final hearing? If he decides 6 months wasn't enough? Samuel had been dreading this conversation but knew it had to happen. Then we'll appeal. We'll fight it every way we can. But what if we lose? What if they split us up anyway? Then you'll remember this time, Samuel said quietly. You'll remember that you had 6 months where you were together and safe. And you'll use that to get through whatever comes next. You're stronger than you think, Clara. All of you are. I don't feel strong. I feel scared all the time. Being scared and being strong aren't opposites. You can be both at once. Samuel looked at her. You've kept your family together through impossible circumstances. You've worked this ranch like you were born to it. You've never once complained or given up. That's strength, Clara. Don't let anyone tell you different. Tears welled in her eyes. I just want to stay. I want this to be home. It is home. No matter what the judge says, this place will always be home to you. All of you. The final inspection happened on a cold day in late November. The inspector was Miss Warren again, and she brought the county superintendent with her, a stern man named Mr. Garrett, who looked like he'd never smiled in his entire life. They went through everything: the house, the barn, the children's schoolwork, their health, their demeanor. They asked Samuel about his finances, his plans, his understanding of what long-term guardianship would entail. These children will need support until they're adults, Mr. Garrett said. Clara until she's 18, David until he's 14 at minimum. Are you prepared for that commitment? For potentially 10 more years of responsibility? Samuel didn't hesitate. Yes. What about marriage? You're a relatively young man. If you were to remarry, how would a new wife feel about 5 children who aren't hers? I'm not looking to remarry. But it could happen, and it would complicate matters. Everything worth doing is complicated, Samuel said. That doesn't make it not worth doing. Mr. Garrett made a note. The county's concern is that this arrangement, while successful so far, may not be sustainable long term. You're one person trying to do the work of 2 parents. What happens when you're overwhelmed? When the children present challenges you can't handle alone? Then I'll ask for help. I'll reach out to neighbors, to the church, to whoever can assist. But I won't give up on these kids. After they left, Samuel found Lucas in the barn, currying Molly with more force than necessary. You all right? Samuel asked. What do you think? Lucas's voice was sharp. They're looking for reasons to take us away. You heard that man. He doesn't think you can handle us. Maybe he's right. Lucas spun around. What? Maybe I can't handle you. Maybe this is too much for one person. Samuel leaned against the stall door. But here's what I've learned these past months. Nobody can handle everything alone. Everybody needs help sometimes. The difference is whether you're willing to admit it and ask for that help or whether you pretend you're fine until everything falls apart. So you're giving up? No, I'm saying I'm not too proud to ask for help when I need it. And neither should you be. You don't have to carry everything yourself, Lucas. You've got a family now. Let us help carry the weight. Lucas turned back to Molly, but his hands had gentled on the curry brush. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. I'm scared they're going to take us away, and I won't be able to protect everyone. I'm scared too, but we're going to face it together. The weeks before the final hearing dragged by with agonizing slowness. Samuel tried to keep things normal, but everyone felt the tension. The children were quieter, more careful, like they were afraid to do anything that might jeopardize their chances. Even David seemed subdued, his questions less frequent. Then, 3 days before the hearing, Miss Patterson came to the house with news. There's a family in town, she said without preamble. The Hendersons. They've expressed interest in adopting 1 or 2 of the children if the guardianship isn't made permanent. Samuel felt his stomach drop. What are you telling me? I'm telling you the county is preparing backup plans. If Judge Martin rules against you, they want to move quickly to place the children. The Hendersons are a good family. They have 3 children of their own, and the mother is very kind. But they've only offered to take 2 of the Reed children, not all 5. Clara had been listening from the doorway. She came forward now, her face pale. Which 2? They haven't specified. Probably the younger ones, David and Benjamin most likely. No. Claire's voice was flat and hard. That's not happening. We promised we'd stay together.
I know, Miss Patterson said gently. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just warning you what might happen. After she left, Clara paced the kitchen like a caged animal. We have to do something. We can't just wait for them to rip us apart. What do you suggest? Samuel asked. Running? Hiding? That'll only make things worse. Then what? We just accept it? No. We go to that hearing and we fight. We tell the truth about what this place has meant to us, about how we've built something real here, and we trust that Judge Martin will see reason. And if he doesn't? Samuel had no answer for that. The morning of the hearing arrived too soon. They drove to town in silence again, but this time the tension was different. This wasn't just about temporary guardianship anymore. This was about whether they'd be allowed to stay together or whether everything they'd built would be torn apart. The courtroom was packed this time. Samuel recognized faces from town. The storekeeper who'd questioned Benjamin, the woman who ran the boarding house, Tom Brennan, the sheriff. Word had spread about the case, and apparently people had opinions. Judge Martin entered, and everyone stood. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, more tired. He surveyed the courtroom with weary eyes. This is the continuation hearing for the guardianship of Samuel Crowley over the Reed children. I've reviewed the reports from the county inspections and the tutor. All indicate that the children are thriving. However, I've also received concerns from various parties about the long-term sustainability of this arrangement. He looked at Samuel. Mr. Crowley, stand, please. Samuel stood, his heart pounding. 6 months ago, I granted you temporary guardianship with specific conditions. You were to ensure the children attended school, maintain adequate living conditions, and meet regularly with county representatives. By all accounts, you have exceeded these requirements. The children are educated, healthy, and well-adjusted. The property is in excellent condition. You've demonstrated both commitment and capability. Samuel felt a flicker of hope, but Judge Martin wasn't finished. However, the law requires me to consider not just the present situation, but the future. These children need stability for years to come, not just months. They need a permanent home with a realistic chance of remaining intact through all the challenges of childhood and adolescence. Mr. Crowley, you're a single man. You have no extended family support. You live on an isolated ranch. While you've managed admirably so far, I have concerns about whether this arrangement can truly last. Your Honor, if I may, Edward Hayes stood. The county's alternative is to split these children among different families. Surely maintaining their bond as siblings outweighs concerns about Mr. Crowley's marital status or geographic location? Perhaps, Judge Martin said. But I need to hear from the children again. Clara Reed, please approach. Clara walked to the stand with her head high, but Samuel could see her hands trembling. She was sworn in and sat down. Miss Reed, 6 months ago you told this court you wanted to stay with Mr. Crowley. Has anything changed? No, sir. If anything, I want it more now. Why? Clara took a breath. Because he gave us something we didn't have before. Not just food and shelter, though that matters. But he gave us a chance to be a family again. To work together, to learn together, to just be kids sometimes instead of orphans scrambling to survive. He taught me that it's okay to ask for help, that being strong doesn't mean carrying everything alone. He taught Lucas that anger isn't strength, that patience and skill matter more. He taught all of us that we're worth something, that we matter. Her voice broke slightly. When we showed up at his gate, we were half dead and nobody wanted us. He could have turned us away like everyone else, but he didn't. He took a chance on us. And now you're asking if this arrangement can last, but the real question is, why wouldn't it? We've been together 6 months and it's worked. Why can't it work for 6 years? For 10 years? Forever? Because circumstances change, Judge Martin said gently. Mr. Crowley might remarry. You children will grow older, have different needs. Conflicts might arise that seem insurmountable now. Then we'll deal with them, Clara said fiercely, the same way we've dealt with everything else, together. Your Honor, I promised my dying mother I'd keep my family together. Mr. Crowley is helping me keep that promise. If you split us up now, you're not just breaking that promise. You're telling us that our family doesn't matter as much as some rule about what a proper household looks like. Judge Martin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Lucas Reed.
Lucas approached the stand with visible reluctance. He was sworn in and sat down, his expression guarded. Lucas, I remember you from the first hearing. You were angry then. Are you still angry? Lucas considered this. Sometimes, but not at Mr. Crowley. Not anymore. What changed? He gave me work to do. Real work, not just chores. He taught me about horses and fixing things and being responsible. He showed me that I could be good at something, that I didn't have to be angry all the time to protect myself. Lucas's voice got quieter. My pa died when I was 9. For 3 years I tried to be the man of the family, but I was just a kid and I didn't know what I was doing. Mr. Crowley. He's showing me what it actually means to be a man, not by telling me, but by being one. Do you feel like he's your father now? Lucas shook his head. No, I had a father and he's gone. Mr. Crowley is something else. Lucas struggled for words. He's someone who cares enough to teach me, but doesn't try to replace what I lost. That's better than a father. That's real. Judge Martin called the younger children next. Benjamin talked about learning to build things. Rosie talked about the garden and how proud she was when the vegetables grew. David, sitting on his stack of books again, talked about eggs and horses and how Mr. Crowley always answered his questions even when they were silly. Do you want to stay with Mr. Crowley? The judge asked David. Yes, sir. Even if it means staying on the ranch instead of living in town? I like the ranch. It's quiet and the horses are nice and Mr. Crowley knows everything. Everything? Well, almost everything. He said he doesn't know why people die, but that's okay because nobody knows that. A ripple of soft laughter went through the courtroom. Judge Martin's expression softened slightly. After all the children had testified, the judge called Samuel to the stand. Mr. Crowley, you've heard the children's testimony. You've seen how attached they've become to you and this arrangement. If I grant permanent guardianship, you understand there's no going back. These children will be your responsibility until they reach adulthood. That could be another 14 years for David. I understand, Your Honor. And you're prepared for that commitment? For the sleepless nights and the illnesses and the arguments and all the challenges that come with raising 5 children? I can't say I'm prepared for all of it, Samuel admitted. I don't know everything that's coming, but I know I want to face it. These kids have given me a reason to live again. They've brought my ranch and my life back from the dead. Whatever challenges come, we'll handle them together. What if you fail? What if you prove unequal to the task? Then I'll ask for help. I'll reach out to neighbors, to the community, to anyone who can assist, but I won't abandon these children. I can promise you that. Judge Martin sat back, studying Samuel for a long moment. The courtroom was completely silent. Samuel could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 10 eyes burning into his back. 5 children who'd put all their faith in him in a legal system that might not care. I'm going to be honest, the judge finally said. This case has troubled me from the beginning. Not because I doubt Mr. Crowley's sincerity or the children's happiness, but because the law exists to protect children, and sometimes protection means following established procedures even when they seem harsh. The traditional approach would be to place these children with established families who meet conventional criteria for adoption. Samuel felt his heart sink. This was it. They were going to lose. But Judge Martin continued. However, I've spent 30 years on this bench, and I've learned that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. The law might say these children should be split among different families who check all the right boxes. But justice, real justice, says that family bonds matter more than paperwork, that what these children have built with Mr. Crowley is worth preserving. He looked at the children, then at Samuel. The reports from the county are exemplary. The children are educated, healthy, and demonstrably happy. Mr. Crowley has exceeded every requirement placed upon him. Most importantly, these 5 children have consistently and emphatically stated their desire to stay together under his guardianship. While they're young, their voices still matter. Their bonds as siblings matter. Judge Martin straightened in his chair. Therefore, I'm granting Samuel Crowley permanent legal guardianship of Clara, Lucas, Rosie, Benjamin, and David Reed, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted. Clara burst into tears. Lucas's face crumpled with relief. Rosie and Benjamin grabbed each other, laughing. David looked confused until Clara scooped him up and spun him around, at which point he started laughing too. Samuel stood there in shock, barely processing what had just happened. Permanent guardianship. They could stay. They were a family now, legally and officially. The judge's gavel came down, calling for order, but the noise continued. Hayes was shaking Samuel's hand, congratulating him. Sheriff Brennan came over to clap him on the shoulder. Even some of the townspeople who'd come to watch were smiling, nodding approval. But Samuel's attention was on the children. They'd surrounded him now, all talking at once, Clara crying and trying to thank him, while Rosie hugged his waist and David climbed up to perch on his shoulders like he'd seen other children do with their fathers. "We get to stay?" Benjamin kept asking. "We really get to stay?" "We really get to stay," Samuel confirmed, and his voice was rough with emotion he didn't bother hiding. Lucas stood slightly apart from the others, his arms crossed, trying to maintain his composure, but Samuel could see his eyes were wet. He met Samuel's gaze and gave a small nod, and in that gesture was more thanks than words could hold. They rode home in the wagon, this time with celebration instead of tension. The children chattered about everything, about what they'd do tomorrow, about Christmas coming, about spring planting and summer harvests, and all the ordinary future moments they could finally count on having. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Samuel helped the children down from the wagon, and they all stood there for a moment, looking at the house and barn and fields that were truly home now. "Can we have a special dinner?" Rosie asked, "to celebrate?" "We can have whatever you want," Samuel said. They went inside and Clara started cooking while the others helped. Samuel stood at the counter watching them move around his kitchen, their kitchen now, with easy familiarity. Lucas set the table without being asked. Benjamin helped David wash his hands. Rosie fetched preserves from the pantry. They were a team, a unit, a family. Dinner was loud and chaotic and perfect. They talked over each other, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, celebrated this new certainty in their lives. After the dishes were washed and put away, they sat in the parlor, Samuel in his chair, and the children scattered around the room. "Mr. Crowley?" David climbed into Samuel's lap, something he'd started doing regularly. "Can I call you Pa now, since you're really ours?" The question caught Samuel off guard. He looked at the other children. Clara was watching him carefully. Lucas looked uncomfortable but not opposed. Rosie and Benjamin waited for his answer. "You can call me whatever feels right to you," Samuel said carefully. "I don't need a title to care about you." "But would it be okay?" David persisted. "If I wanted to call you Pa?" Samuel thought about his own daughter, about Emma calling him Papa in her bright, clear voice. He'd thought he'd never hear that word again, had thought that part of his life was over. But here was this little boy, offering him a second chance at something he'd lost. "It would be more than okay," Samuel said quietly. "It would be an honor." David smiled and settled more comfortably in Samuel's lap. "Okay, Pa." The word hung in the air, strange and familiar all at once. The other children didn't immediately follow David's lead, but Samuel could see them thinking about it, considering this new possibility. That night, after all the children had gone to bed, Samuel stood in the doorway of each room, watching them sleep. Clara and Rosie in the room that had been Margaret's, their breathing soft and even. Benjamin in the small room, sprawled across his bed like he owned it. David in the other small room, hugging a stuffed horse that Lucas had made for him from scraps of fabric. And Lucas in what had once been the storage room, lying on his back staring at the ceiling even though his eyes were closed. Samuel knew Lucas wasn't asleep. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Lucas's eyes opened. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how different things are now. 6 months ago, we were walking through heat with nothing. Now we're here and it's permanent, and," his voice caught, "I keep thinking it can't be real. That I'm going to wake up and we'll still be on the road." Samuel stepped into the room, sat on the edge of Lucas's bed. "It's real. You're safe now. You can stop waiting for the other shoe to drop." "I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to stop being scared." "Neither do I," Samuel admitted. "I lost my family and spent 3 years scared of caring about anything again. Then you all showed up, and I had to figure out how to live with fear instead of letting it control me. It's still there, that fear. But it's quieter now." Lucas was silent for a moment. Then he said, "David called you Pa." He did. Do you want us to call you that? I want you to call me whatever feels right. No pressure, no expectations. Lucas nodded slowly. Okay, well, good night. Good night, son. Samuel left before Lucas could respond to that word, son, but he heard the sharp intake of breath and knew it had landed. In his own room, Samuel lay in bed and thought about the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he'd been a broken man waiting to die, living in a house full of ghosts, seeing no future beyond the next empty day. Then 5 filthy children had appeared at his gate asking for water, and everything had changed. He'd given them a home, but they'd given him something just as valuable, a reason to keep living. They'd reminded him that grief didn't have to be the end of the story, that there could be chapters after loss if you were brave enough to turn the page. Samuel got up and walked to the window, looking out at his ranch in the moonlight. The fences stood straight. The barn was solid. The garden plot waited for spring planting. The house was full of sleeping children who would wake tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, who would keep waking here for years to come. He thought about Margaret and Emma, about how they'd loved this place and each other and him. He'd always thought he'd betrayed their memory by surviving without them, by continuing to breathe when they couldn't. But maybe that wasn't betrayal. Maybe the real betrayal would have been wasting the life they'd wanted him to have. I'm still here, he whispered to the night, to the ghost, to the memory of love that never truly died. And I'm not alone anymore. The words felt like a release, like permission he'd been waiting 3 years to give himself. He could grieve Margaret and Emma and still love these new children. He could remember the past and still build a future. He could be broken and healing at the same time. Samuel went back to bed and slept better than he had in years. The next morning, he woke to the sound of children already up and moving around. He came downstairs to find Clara making breakfast, Lucas feeding the horses, and the younger 3 arguing cheerfully about whose turn it was to gather eggs. "Morning, Pa," David called when he saw Samuel. "Morning." The word still felt strange in Samuel's mouth, but also right, like a coat that didn't quite fit yet, but would with wearing. They ate breakfast together, made plans for the day, divided up chores with practiced ease. This was their routine now, their life. Not temporary, not conditional, but real and permanent, and theirs. After breakfast, Samuel found a moment alone with Clara. She was hanging laundry on the line, her movements efficient and sure. "I never properly thanked you," she said without looking at him, "for taking us in, for fighting for us, for giving us a home when nobody else would." "You thank me every day," Samuel said, "by being exactly who you are, by taking care of your siblings, by being brave enough to trust me." "I didn't trust you at first," Clara admitted. "I thought you'd be like all the others. I thought you'd use us for work and then send us away." "What changed your mind?" Clara smiled slightly. "The way you looked at David when he asked if you were going to shoot us? I saw something break in your face, something that had been frozen for a long time. I realized you were just as lost as we were, and lost people understand each other." Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "I know you say you're not our father," Clara continued, "and maybe you're right, but you're family. That's what matters. We chose each other, and that's better than blood anyway." She finished hanging the laundry and walked back to the house, leaving Samuel standing in the yard with tears in his eyes and sun on his face, and the knowledge that sometimes the family you choose is the one that saves you. The months that followed were full of ordinary miracles. First snowfall with 5 children seeing wonder in every flake. Christmas morning with gifts wrapped in newspaper and joy that cost nothing. Lucas's 13th birthday celebrated with cake and a new saddle for the horses. Clara learning to bake bread that actually rose properly. Benjamin building a birdhouse that didn't fall apart. Rosie reading her first full book alone. David losing his first tooth and insisting on keeping it under his pillow even though there was no tooth fairy to bring money. There were hard days too. Days when Lucas's anger flared and he said things he didn't mean. Days when Clara worked herself to exhaustion because she didn't know how to stop being the one who held everything together. Days when the younger children fought or cried or tested every boundary Samuel set. Days when Samuel himself felt overwhelmed and wondered if he was doing any of this right. But they weathered those days together. They learned to apologize, to forgive, to try again. They learned that family wasn't about perfection, but about showing up, about choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard. Spring came and they planted the garden again, this time with 6 pairs of hands instead of 5. Summer brought heat and long days of work and the satisfaction of watching things grow. Fall meant harvest and preserves and preparing for another winter. And through it all, the children grew, not just physically, but in confidence, in security, in the knowledge that they belonged. One evening, almost a year after the final hearing, Samuel stood on his porch watching the sunset. He did this most evenings now, had made it a ritual. Clara came out to join him, as she often did. "Thinking about anything in particular?" she asked. "Just grateful," Samuel said, "for all of this. For you kids. For second chances." Clara leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the ranch. "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if we'd given up? If we'd stopped at that ranch where the man shot at us, or if we'd turned around instead of keeping going? We never would have found you. We'd have been split up in some orphanage, and you'd still be here alone. Guess we were meant to find each other. Or maybe we were just stubborn enough to keep walking until we did." Clara smiled. "Either way, I'm glad we didn't give up." "So am I." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the Montana sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Behind them, the house was full of noise. Lucas teaching David a song, Rosie and Benjamin arguing about something trivial, the sounds of life being lived. Samuel thought about the man he'd been a year ago, alone and waiting to die. That man wouldn't recognize this life, wouldn't believe it was possible to hurt so deeply and still heal, to lose everything and still find something worth keeping. But here he was, surrounded by children who weren't his blood but were his family nonetheless. Here he was, with a ranch that thrived again, and a house that rang with laughter, and a future that stretched out full of possibility instead of empty years. "Pa?" David's voice called from inside. "Can you help me with something?" Samuel smiled at the title that had become natural over the months. "Coming, son?" He went inside to his children, to the chaos and love and ordinary miracles of family life. And as the door closed behind him and the Montana night settled over the ranch, the house at the end of the road glowed with light and warmth and the sound of people who'd found each other against all odds and decided to stay. They'd been broken when they met. 5 orphans and 1 widower, all of them carrying grief too heavy for their souls. But they'd found a way to be broken together, and in that sharing, they'd discovered something stronger than they'd been before. They'd discovered that home wasn't a place. It was people who chose to stay. It was hands reaching out in the darkness. It was second chances and stubborn hope and the refusal to give up on each other. And on this ranch, in this house, with these people, Samuel Crowley had finally found his way home.